Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. I think I only heard one Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Thank you. Welcome to the 30th annual Southwest Economic Outlook. And this is when I turn to Rich and point out that Rich has been here for all 30 of them. And thank you for that. Thank you to everyone for being here today. I do want to point out the college has gone to masks for gatherings. So just please, if you're not eating or drinking, wear your mask. So I will leave it at that. I know there's mixed opinions on masks, and I just wanted to, as a college official, point out the college policy. I'm Stephen Elias, Dean of the School of Business. Hard to believe that this is actually my 5th gathering of this event, and time has flown by. I'll simply say I remember my first one. We were in the concert hall, and I think my family and I had been here for about 6 months, and I pointed out how welcoming and gracious and kind everyone was to my family and I. And then this morning, I realized that wasn't the honeymoon period, because everyone here is still gracious and kind. And I just want to say thank you to everybody and ask, are we not the luckiest and most blessed people to get to live in Southwest Colorado? I think we are. Thank you for being here. Thank you to everyone who joined last year virtually. We actually had over 300 people join virtually last year, which was amazing. We're not broadcasting live today, but we are recording, and we'll make the recording available as soon as possible. So if you do know folks who weren't able to travel in, please let them know they'll be able to watch at their leisure. I do want to thank, we have a lot of elected officials who made the trip to Durango from around the southwest part of the state. Thank you for making the trip and being here. Fortunately, we had good weather, and hopefully your traveling was easy enough, but thank you for being here. I do want to acknowledge Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo is not allowing their senior economist to travel right now. So regards from Tim Quinlan. I emailed up and back with Tim, and he loves coming to Durango and doing this event every year. Hopefully Wells Fargo will send someone next year. And if not, we'll figure it out. We will make it work. That's what we do. If Mitch Dye were here, I'm sure some of you know Mitch, I would point out that not only are we the best business school in the Four Corner region, we're also the Swiss Army knife of business schools. And so we figure it out. I do want to thank everyone at the college for helping making this available, our IT staff, our marketing staff, Lindsay Nyquist staff, Pat Flores. Where's Pat? There's Pat. Thank you, Pat. And we won't sing and embarrass Pat, but happy belated birthday to Pat. Thank you to Sharon Doty, my former assistant. And I say former because lucky for her, she just retired last month. So she'll get to enjoy Durango 7 days a week. Normally, I give a quick update on the business school. I won't do that this year. There's a ton going on. I'm sure you'll hear about it in one way or the other. I do want to acknowledge, though, that we're going into our 7th year of Hawk Tank. We have some Hawk Tank judges here. For example, Allison, I think you've been a judge since day one, haven't you? Thank you. And we have some others in here as well, so thank you for that. The original presenting sponsor for Hawk Tank was First National Bank of Durango, and then it went to Swan. And then as of 2022, our new presenting sponsor is Baird. So we want to acknowledge Baird and say thank you. And then also we received a EDA grant primarily to run the Center for Innovation downtown and engage in all sorts of great economic development work. So I will simply say, be on the lookout. We hope to have good things coming out of there. I will introduce our first speaker, Laura Lewis Marcino from Region 9. We will have we'll have our 2 presenters, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. And we've got some portable mics, so I will play Phil Donahue if anyone remembers Phil Donahue and walk around. Thank you.
So hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm like, wow, people in person. I had a COVID Christmas, and I know many of you have as well. And so I really appreciate you being here with Mass and in person. And I want to thank, there's several of my Region 9 board members that came from Dolores County and Montezuma County. So we have a lot of folks that drove further to be here in person than we have people in the community. So I just thank you so much for making that time. I am really excited to be presenting for my third year. And we have some new economics professors who may take my place, right? So we'll see how that is. I'm kidding. No, maybe not. I also wanted to just make note that since we don't have Wells Fargo today, I tried to do the same outfit just so that you feel more at home. I am not an economist by training. I'm more of a data geek, and Region 9 Economic Development District, we do a lot of data for the region. So whether you use data for your grant writing or for just information, we know that good data helps you make better decisions. So that's why I'm thrilled to be presenting our Southwest Colorado regional update. And I also just wanted to acknowledge that last year when we did this, it was at the beginning of 2020, and a lot of folks wanted to know, how did COVID impact us? And we know that we didn't have that data at that point. And that's one thing when we meet in January, I don't have a lot of the 2021 data because it hasn't all been compiled. But I can give you an idea of what we looked like in 2020 and forecast our trends moving forward. Also, for those of you who've been in my presentations before, I last year did some thumbs up and thumbs down of how we were performing as a region. And this year, I'm not doing that because we really didn't see any change. For example, last year we talked about the growing timber industry. That is still the case, and we'll talk about that. But I wanted to start with the elephant in the room, because a lot of our priorities right now around economic development are workforce challenges, housing challenges, and just the economy in general. And that is the elephant in the room, is that we are all having more birthdays and we are getting older. And how is that going to impact our region now and in the future is really kind of what the whole theme of my presentation today will look like. So let's get started. You've probably seen this chart before, but I will be covering all 5 counties in our region, and we have a lot of information on our website. We have a new data dashboard. We have county profiles. We also have individualized data on Cortez, Pagosa Springs, and Durango, our larger municipalities. So please feel free to go on our website, and my contact information will be at the end if you are a data geek like me and you need more information. So this is Region 9's employment. You can see each of the 5 counties. Over time, we have grown pretty steadily. You'll see that the national recession did impact us, and we went to our lowest job count about 2010, and that was 2 years lag time, and that was what happened in Colorado overall, but the recession hit us later, and it did hit our region. And then we continued to grow our jobs over time, and then you'll see 2020, that would be our COVID impact. We did not get as low as we were as of the Great Recession, but we did see a decline. And then our forecast is that we will continue to grow at the rate that we were prior to natural and man-made disasters, as they will probably continue to occur. This is our 2020 employment by industry and wage sector. So if you file your tax return and you're in your NAICS codes and you decide you're a construction company or you're a professional and business service, this is how the data is cataloged for our region. You'll see that I have color-coded them for low, medium, and high wage earners. And that is predominantly that industry. That does not mean that everyone in that industry makes a high wage. There's a lot of low, mid-wage earners in all of these categories. But overall, you'll see that we have the most jobs in government. And when I say government, that does not mean local municipalities or, our county governments. That is our public lands, that's our park service, that's a lot of our federal land agencies. So we do have the most jobs in government. Retail trade is second. healthcare, accommodation and food services. And as you can see, retail trade and accommodation and food services, which were the most impacted by COVID, are also the lowest paying sectors. And where we have almost the least amount of jobs down at the bottom are some of the highest paying sectors. And mining does include oil and gas and the energy industry. So I do want to acknowledge Donna Graves with Information Services. She helped me with the charts, and also Pam Moore helped me with some housing information. I just want to acknowledge I need help. As I said, I'm just a data geek, but she created this waterfall chart, which hopefully you will like, give me feedback on. But these are the same industry sectors across the bottom, and it compares the jobs in 2019 and yes, in 2020. And we lost jobs in almost every category. And the amount of job loss you'll see at the top of that kind of waterfall flow. So you'll see at the right side, we've lost over 900 jobs in the accommodation and food services between 2019 and 2020. And then you'll also see that we gained jobs in agriculture, which was the only sector that we really gained significant jobs, and that's a good sign. And I know we have a lot of the local food movement. We have a lot of activity in Montezuma and Dolores counties around agriculture, and that is showing. So this is our industry growth forecast, and I want to show this to you because forecasts do change to reflect changing circumstances. So this is what happened with our pandemic. So the 2020 forecast was what I gave you last year. So that's where in 2019, they were saying, this is what's going to happen in 2020. And they expected there'd be an increase in healthcare jobs, and we would see growth in the agriculture, forestry, fishing, hunting, which would be timber as well as agriculture. And what you see now is our 2021 forecast based on what we know now. And what we know now is that we are going to see some job losses continue in some of these industries, and you can kind of see what that looks like. Because we're a rural region, the numbers are not high, but this again is kind of what we're projecting going forward into this next year. You will see that, again, agriculture, the timber industry continues to show job increases, as does healthcare and manufacturing as well, and some are very comparable year over year. So I want to have my quick economy lesson so that I can explain how our economy works and why this is important. So there's the big bad world out there. We are yellow. You can use the yellow circle as either your personal community, your county, or our region. So money comes into our communities through a variety of ways. Tourism obviously brings in money. Anytime we export goods and services from, say, manufacturing or agriculture, we sell those products and the money comes back into our community. Transfer payments are like retiree benefits. That money comes into our community. Our savings, our stock returns, those things come into our community. The goal is your community is only going to be healthy if more money is coming in than leaving. So just remember that every time you shop in Farmington, okay? So basically, we want more money coming into our communities than leaving, and money will leave. I mean, that's just natural. We're also tourists in other communities. You know, we do shop online, we pay taxes, that kind of thing. And so a lot of my philosophy is people worry about the economy, that it always has to grow. Growth can be defined in different ways. You don't necessarily have to get bigger. You have to have more money coming in, if that makes sense. So that's a kind of a different way to look at it. And then in your economy, you have these two circles. Indirect base is directly related to the money coming in. So my example will be the hotels. If we don't have tourists, the hotel industry is going to struggle. So they're directly related to that money coming in. Agriculture, it could be Southwest Ag in Bayfield. If there is no agriculture, Southwest Ag is not going to be selling a lot of equipment. So that is that example. Residential services, and I'm going to highlight this a lot, those are your quality of life jobs. Those are the jobs that you need to have a community that people want to live in. And that includes not just your grocery stores, but that includes your teachers, your law enforcement, all of the things that make your community safe and vibrant. Okay, enough of the lesson. So this is Region 9's economy. So these are those three buckets that I showed you. We have the direct base, which is the money that comes into our region. 68% of our economy is based on money coming in. That's why tourism becomes kind of important. But it's also our retirees. They do bring money to our community, and anytime we export products. Then we have our indirect base, that's 11%. Those are the ones that if one of our sectors starts struggling, that indirect base is dramatically impacted and quickly. And then local residential services is those quality of life jobs that I was mentioning. And within 1 year, that has gone down 2%. And that's my biggest concern as an economy, because for us to be an attractive region, we need to preserve those jobs. Okay. And this is just that 68% that I showed you. This is the breakdown of what that looks like between 2019 and 2020. And we didn't see much change at all. A little bit in tourism decline, and households increase. And a lot of that is also our savings. You know, the money that we did get from the stimulus, a lot of people saved, and they did use it in our community, but they used it for things, not necessarily food, clothing, shelter, but they bought something that they really wanted, like a hot tub. I know so many did that, so I'm just putting that out there. It wasn't me. So anyway, this is how it breaks down. Households is kind of a catch-all. It includes the retirees. It also includes payments that we make to folks for like food stamps and self-sufficiency payments, unemployment insurance. And then regional services would be something like the hospital that serves more than one community, or Fort Lewis College. And then some of the others should be pretty self-evident. This is that same percentage of jobs broken down by each county. And what you'll see is that in 4 of our counties, households, so that includes primarily retirees, is where you're getting the most percentage of job base. And then in San Juan, it's tourism. And that changed slightly. We had tourism was the biggest in, I believe it was Archuleta County last year. So we've seen some little shifts, and then you can see the 2020 and 2019 numbers. Not a lot of change, but still some change between those 2 years. Now let me see on the screen, can you see the headers for what yellow? Okay. Sometimes I have to click them in. This is total personal income by county. So this is each of our counties and how much money is in our counties based on what you have, all of you collectively. And I want to explain what these categories look like. Transfer payments, again, is your retirees. So you can see by some of your counties, retirees predominantly, it includes other things, make a large percentage of your income in your counties. Dividends, interest, and rent is your savings, your stocks, you know, if you have rental income. Residency adjustments are the most fascinating for me. Those are your commuters. And what happens is what you'll see, let me use Montezuma as an example, 6%. They are getting 6% of their money from people who don't work in their county, but bring that money back. So they may work in La Plata and they bring their money back, and they have a house in Montezuma. Or they work in New Mexico and they bring their money back. What you see with La Plata is the reverse is true. They have more people that live elsewhere and are taking their money back, taking money out of the La Plata economy. It's only 1%, but still it's become a negative. And that's the problem when you start looking at affordability. If people are not living in your community and they're working in your community, they're taking their money out of your community when they go home, because the kids are in schools elsewhere. They have homes elsewhere, that type of thing. And that's the thing that we're starting to worry about with affordability issues in La Plata. And then employment. This to me is very interesting, that less than half predominantly of all of our money coming in comes from people working. That is a shift. And I want to show you how that looks trend-wise. So these are the same categories starting in 1970. Look how employment has gone down. And you wonder why we have a workforce shortage. And then you see that transfer payments have grown up. And if you look at the last 2 columns, look at transfer payments just in that 1 year. That is our stimulus, partially. That would be in the dividends, interest, and rent. And that is also the folks that we may have more attractiveness to our retiree community. Again, they bring money. I'm not saying that's bad, but we just need to be aware of how that mix impacts our economy. I want to talk a little bit about population, and I warned Rich because I'm taking a couple state charts from the state demographer, but population is very important on our future workforce and our affordability and our housing, all the things that are top priorities. So what this chart basically shows is over time, Colorado's population change. The blue is our natural births and deaths. You know, I have a child, my parents pass away type of thing. And what you see is that in 2020, it went down. And that is, we had a higher death rate than we usually do. Also 2019. And then you'll see that projected or forecasted is that our population will continue to decline. And I really look forward to Rich's input on this, because what I've heard is part of it is because of our lack of affordability that, the blue line is going down because we're having less babies. COVID was not a baby boom, in case anyone heard that if you spend a year together, you might have more children. Apparently that did not work. But the red is in migration. So people coming in from other states to live in Colorado, and you see that's all over the place. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it went down obviously during COVID. So people relocated within Colorado. We did not have more people coming into Colorado. And then we project that that is also going to decline, and that's the affordability issue. We're competing with all the other states, and what is going to make our region and our state attractive. This is Region 9's population cohorts. And you all know, if you're Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, silent generation, etc. And this is kind of our population right now. And what you can see is the high points are about 65 years old and around 19, 20 years old. 1920 is because we have a college and we have educational institutions. We bring in those young people to educate. But what you see is that they leave, if you notice the dip. And you see our workforce, which right now are millennials. I'm sorry, we all kind of dreaded millennials, and they're our workforce, just kidding. And then we have the Generation X, and then you will see that we have more retirees than we have workforce. So again, I mean, this is very self-evident. We had a workforce issue before COVID, and we will continue to have a workforce issue because people are having less children. Okay, and then the future generations, they don't have on here, but I'm going to show you another slide. And this is just a joke, but they keep talking about the new generation will be called Generation Debt. So let's hope that's not true. So here, I want to talk about our future workforce. So this is the change that we saw in the census from the under 18 population in our counties. And as you can see, Larimer and Weld are loving life. They're building schools left and right. They're having a great old time because they have all the young people. And you'll see that we have lost a lot of our young people. This primarily is births and deaths, and under 18, they just don't necessarily move into our area unless they bring parents. And we are not able to attract workforce workers because of our affordability. So just something to kind of keep in mind. And then this is the projection for 2040. And basically, as you see, you all got older in this chart. Excuse me. It is more level. Remember that the 1600 mark was kind of the high point. You see it still in the around 20-year-olds. And now you see it in the late 50s. And then you see our retirees. So it's flatter. And that is basically because when they looked at our projections and our forecasts, they believe our region is attractive and we are going to continue to in-migrate people. And so that is something I'm kind of giving to you. People think we are the place they want to be. So we need to make sure that when they come here, they stay. And so we do have that opportunity in our region, unlike other areas in the state. And you also see kind of the level of the future generations and the projected birth rates. So I find this interesting. And then if you look at the population, right now our region is about 100,000. And this is saying that in the next 20 years, we'll gain about 23,000 people. That is not runaway growth. And that's another thing we hear. Oh my gosh, we're growing exponentially. No, we're not. Our region is not. We are growing. And if we want to grow, we really need to try to grow our young families and our young people. the most in order to be a sustainable region. And one more lecture on this. This is basically the forecasted change of the 16 to 64-year-olds. So the good news is the forecast says people are going to want to be here in our region, and that's good news. And then, as you can see, and you know, Eastern Colorado is really struggling with population, aging, a lot of those things. So we are a lot more vibrant in our state compared to other areas. And then here's the 65 and plus. Not only do they think people want to move here, they think they're all going to be old. I'm kidding. So, and I'm kidding, please. Yes, I'm having birthdays too. So this just kind of shows, but we're seeing a decline in our smaller counties of Dolores and San Juan. And some of that is just if they don't have facilities, again, workforce and jobs, if we don't have ways for people to age in place, they have to leave. And so this can be indicative of a lack of services in these communities. And the other thing I want to mention, this is the census that passed. Our new census numbers are showing that our young people are predominantly going to be minority populations because they are the populations that are having children. And that is really interesting to think of your future workforce. How are you going to make them adapt and be comfortable? How are they going to have the education, skills, and such that you need? And so I just wanted to note that in our region, predominantly, it's Native American and it is Hispanic that we are going to see. This is the age diversity across the state, but if you notice, the younger you are, the more diverse you are. And that's going to continue. And I need to look at that as Region 9. We are a bunch of, I'll admit it, we're all white. Our future Region 9 staff is not going to be all white. And how do we make sure that we get the best and brightest for what we need? And how do we make sure we are not creating barriers for that? Now I want to talk a little bit about housing. I don't like this chart. But basically with this housing forecast, this is a study done by the Southwest Colorado Council of Governments and Housing Solutions. And I wanted to say that that study is available if you want to go into all of those details, and I can get that for you if you're interested. But across the top, they looked at short-term demand over the next 2 years. We are behind in our housing units. And let me stop for a minute. When we looked at our industry sectors, up to 2008, construction was one of our leading growth drivers in terms of our economy. And since 2008, that has not been the case. So we have not been building homes. And that's an issue for Colorado. I know Rich will talk about that as well, but we are behind. And so in the next 2 years, what this is saying in each of your counties, this is what you need just to accommodate your employment demand. If you don't accommodate your employment demand, that usually means those people either do not stay or they live somewhere else. And then you have your commuter issue where they're taking money out of your community. I don't know exactly how they came to these numbers, but if you also notice, they're not talking about high wage job housing. They're talking about low wage and moderate job housing. No surprise. I think none of you in this room expected, wow, we really need to build more mega mansions. And I'm kidding. But what we do need to do is convert those mega mansions into townhomes. Just kidding. So anyway, you guys are, have some more coffee, just checking. So then the second chart, I'll just keep going, is looking at worker and retiree demand and seasonal and vacation demand. So our average need over the next 20 years is to have about 907 units in our region. So obviously how we do that varies to meet not just our worker demand, but our retiree demand and our seasonal vacation demand. And that's based on projections, but the initial short-term need is really where we're at the crisis point. Now I want to talk a little bit about wages and affordability. So with Region 9, you can see at the bottom our 2019 average annual wage, and that's taking the highest paid wage earner and the lowest paid wage earners and averaging them out. So our average wage is, as you see, is a lot lower than Colorado overall, which is $66,000. And if you make an average wage and you're an adult, if we look at livable wages, our communities are pretty affordable. We're okay. And Region 9 has been calculating livable wages since 1999. And what that is looking at a basic expenditure budget. You know, what do you need for food, clothing, shelter, transportation, healthcare, et cetera, entertainment. And that basic budget is done nationally, and it's also done, you know, in Colorado. And then we localize our housing costs and we localize our childcare costs where we can. So the livable wage, we always compare, you know, what are our annual average wages and what's the livable wage? You know, what's the difference? And what this chart is really telling you is that as soon as you have children, this region and none of our counties are affordable. And that's the concern when I said local residential services, quality of life jobs, all of those things about keeping our workforce and our young families. This basically says that it is not affordable for those folks. And then if you have on the last column, both 2 adults and 2 children, both working, this is what they need to earn just to make it in our community. And how many families do you know that don't have 2 adults in their household? Right there, you're seeing about our unaffordability issues, or that you have 2 adults that are not earning anything close to average wages, minimum wage, say. This community is not affordable. And they are our workforce, especially in our service sector. So just wanted to kind of give you that perspective. And the reason the one is highlighted in orange, Local First updated La Plata County's data already, and that's where when they use the localized housing and childcare costs. So the livable wage data that I'm showing you is 2019. We're going to be updating it for 2022 this next year. So we will have more updated numbers, but Local First updated it for La Plata County. So you can see how much that changed. Okay, I want to talk about housing, and this is where I want to thank Pam. She helped us a lot with this chart. We know that median home prices have jumped from 2020 to 2021, and I do have 2021 prices. So we broke it down by all of our communities. And then we're assuming, and please know you can change this assumption, if I'm going to buy a home and I live in Pagosa Springs, the average home price is right now, or median home price is $524,000, and I want to buy that house. I'm going to get a 30-year loan. I'm going to probably put 10% down, and the interest rate's right around 3%. I have to have $97,743 in my annual income to even qualify to buy that house. Now you see where our problem is. You see that next column. 90% of the families in Pagosa Springs do not make that income. And that's because it's primarily a tourism-based economy, lower wage jobs. Think about the livable wage, and think about their lack of workforce. Think about their influx of retirees, and you can see what's happening. And that's happening in all of our communities to some extent. So right there, if we cannot afford to buy a home, we cannot afford to set up roots in a community, and we are not going to be quote unquote permanent residents, very likely. Or we are going to cost our community by being on food stamps and other forms of assistance. Happy New Year. And then the last chart, I'm down to the end, is I really want to talk about looking at, I just pulled out teacher salaries. They're one of our local residential services. And when we talk about affordability, it's very easy to see how our communities are no longer affordable for families. In the early 2000s, what was Durango High School? It was a 5A school. What is it now? It's a 3A school. Enough said. We're losing our youth in our school systems, which is a sign that our communities are not affordable to families. So when we look at teacher salaries, and again, this is an average, it's taken from the Colorado Department of Education. It has been going down in the last 2 years. It's going down because we have more new teachers that make less, and we're losing our experienced teachers to retirement or COVID aggravation, all of those things. And so what you see, and the point I'm trying to make, is none of our teachers make a salary to buy a home right now with the average salary. And this is just something we need to make sure that we can address affordability and housing needs in our community, or our workforce situation is only going to grow. Couple More positive notes. I wanted to just compare. We tracked the data of the train as well as Mesa Verde. They bounced back from COVID. The train actually is doing better in 2021 than they did for many years. And maybe that's a lot of people have been waiting for years to ride the train, and now they got to, I don't know. But they also, as you know, were dramatically impacted by the fire. And then, of course, Mesa Verde park numbers are about back on par with pre-COVID, but a little under their peak. And this is our airport traffic. Durango La Plata County Airport is a self-sustaining enterprise. They do not use tax dollars, so they are completely funded through, their parking fees and their vendors and, the airlines, and they have fully recovered. And then the Cortez Airport is seeing an uptick. Theirs is a little more less stable in terms of their passengers and ridership, and a lot of that is because they're an essential air service, and just the availability of flights and things like that play a large role. So I just want to end with some opportunities instead of saying thumbs down. We all know that we are going to struggle with workforce moving forward, and we know that we have a housing issue, and we know we have an affordability issue. So these are some thoughts for you all to take as you can make a difference in the jobs and things that you do. We need to preserve our local residential service jobs. That's our law enforcement, our teachers, our retail, and ways that we can do that are going to be really important, because if we lose some of these, like good law enforcement, say for an example, why would somebody be attracted to our community if it just doesn't feel safe, or if they can't go downtown and go to a restaurant? So that's the importance of local residential services in our kind of recruitment attraction package, I guess you would say. Workforce, we need to attract and retain our youth. It's going to look different. We have Fort Lewis College, for example, bringing in our youth. What the statistics show, and I know Rich can talk about this because he's in Boulder, but I don't want to pick on Boulder. But if communities try to get jobs for their students before they leave college and they can stay, 60% of your college students will remain in your area. And that's why college towns, typically see a lot more youth. They're pretty vibrant because they usually are ways to attract youth and keep youth in communities. So that's something all of us in the region, we need to look at. How are we going to look at those students and get them to stay here and have jobs for them, and so they don't go to the front range, so to speak. Also retain our youth. We have a lot of youth that don't go away to school. But they may move away because that's what youth do. They want to experience life and new challenges. We need to figure out a way to boomerang them back when they have their families. And now, I speak for myself. There is no way I would ever move home, but that's like 50-50, right? A lot of youth would love to move home. So that's kind of what you need to think of when you're looking at working at 10-year reunions. We always talk about you need to show up at your high school 10-year reunion and try to figure out who you can bring back to your community. We also need to get more people in the workforce. You saw those employment levels. We have a large group of community members that are not working that possibly could work if we could improve our services in our community around mental health and substance use. Obviously, if you have a substance issue, you're not a reliable worker. We need you as a worker. How do we get you back on track? And so that whole side of our economy is very important. Also, persons with disabilities. If we are going to have less workers, we need to make sure that we can bring all workers up to a standard where we can hire them and use them. Also provides opportunities for aging. We don't want you to retire and never work again. So how can we provide opportunities for my husband always jokes when he retires, he's going to be a golf, one of the marshals of the golf course, part-time, great, but he's still in the workforce. How can we meet the needs of our retirees to continue to participate in the workforce in a way that's comfortable for them? Because the largest share of our future growth is going to be 65 and over. And then finally, are our workforces situated to adapt to the inclusion and ethnic and racial diversity? What am I missing as a Gen X white person, to attract that diversity that is going to be growing as our young people in our community? And then telework. We are an attraction for telework. We really are. And so more people will continue to move to our regions if we can address housing for them to live in, shore up our broadband and our affordability. And we're working on all those things. I mean, all of these things play together, but that is, again, another opportunity for our region. And then in terms of housing, again, preserve our local residential services. Focus your housing efforts on preserving those workforce members that have families, number one. And then look at different types of housing. I just talked about how we're all aging. You know, how many of us want 3-story townhomes? I mean, you know, so looking at the type and style of housing that's going to meet demand. And then I wrote down convert office space because this is something the Front Range is looking at. You know, a lot of people now working remotely, they have a lot of office buildings, office space, and they have a housing shortage. So they're like, wow, let's convert office space. But in some way, do you have buildings that you can do some more mixed use to help with that housing need? And obviously there are a lot of studies about what, you know, single starting in their career folks need in terms of housing, and that may be rentals. They don't all have to own versus someone with a family. They usually want a backyard, even if it's a small space, or the playground, you know, if you have a multi-use development, things like that. I could go on, but I won't. I'm going to turn this over to Rich, and I'd like to introduce Rich. I've had the opportunity to work with him for 3 years. We contribute to the Southwest Economic Outlook. We did an article on the tribes, which was a first for Colorado's book, and hope you guys enjoyed that. Rich has been here 30 years, and I work a lot with one of his colleagues, Brian Lewandowski, on a couple state committees, and really, really appreciate their involvement and work and answering all of my questions as well. So Rich, the floor is yours.
So one thing that I've noticed every place I go to speak, they give me smart water that I think is a sign that they're telling me, you know, Rich, you're not where you used to be. You know, it's okay. It's okay. And Brian, actually, that Laura was just mentioning, actually has my job that I used to have. He's become the executive director of the center as a year ago. So I am not where I used to be, but I'm really happy to be here, and specifically to talk about both the national and the state economies. So I appreciate you being here. It's great to be back in this beautiful part of Colorado. Let me start by saying I think Laura's presentation was not only excellent, but raised a lot of the issues that I think are not just local, but statewide, and also are partially COVID related in the sense of things are changing, and we don't know which things are changing permanently and which things are changing sort of temporarily. For example, the very last thing she was talking about on converting office space. You know, are people going to go back to the office? We went back to the office, and in order to retain workforce, we had to be more accommodating of people working from home certain days of the week. I would be lying if I didn't tell you we're getting raided. Our employees are getting raided by the private sector right now, because, you know, we had a furlough, a pay cut, and then we had no pay. We got that 5% back, but then we get no pay increase, and the private sector is just bidding like crazy for workers right now. And it's all part of what Laura was talking about with this sort of worker shortage. And I don't think that's going away. You can think of all these different policies, but the punchline is the more retirees and other folks you have around, the more residential services you need, and who's going to do those residential types of services that she was describing. I mean, generally speaking, it's younger people who are doing a lot of that. And it's not just restaurants, it's medical. And we know there's a shortage of nurses. And Steve was telling me yesterday that there's going to be a joint program with Anschutz here at the campus. I think that's fantastic. But that profession is getting really depleted right now. So in the COVID space, I have a daughter who's a senior nurse at Anschutz and senior in longevity there, but not age. She's young. And she got the first wave of COVID before the vaccine was out. She wound up with that and breezed through it. And now she's come down with the most recent, even though she's vaccinated twice and boosted, she wound up getting Omicron. And this has just put her out completely. Just the opposite of what you read and hear. She's been in bed for a week and she's not moving, and never sort of seen her like this in all the years that we've known her. So it's interesting, you know, how much things are going to change, and will we permanently be different? You know, and I think all of us need to sort of, you know, think about that. One of the things that's gone on is I just updated this chart. We updated this chart yesterday in case you haven't seen this. This is sort of the acceleration of what's gone on with Omicron. Again, generally speaking, much less severe if you've been vaccinated and boosted. Not as many people needing to go for hospitalization and so on, but still a really strong spike. And if you believe Dr. Fauci, this is going to peak in the next week or so, and then we're going to start to see sort of the variation of that after it. It's going to be, you know, we're going to get back to closer to normal. But every time this happens, we are going to see impacts on our tourism industry, and you heard a lot about that here. It's a very important part of the economy, and it is for the state of Colorado. And every time we get these outbreaks, for example, if you look at the national restaurant data, the reservations are dropping dramatically right now at restaurants around the country. And so you movie theater visits and so on. So every time you get one of these events, you sort of have an economic backlash, at least for part of the economy. And that continues to be an issue. So more about that as we go along. So anyway, talking about the national economy, most of this is extremely upbeat. I know I started it a little bit on a downer here, but the U.S. economy has been doing really, really well. We already got back to equivalent to the previous peak. This year is going to have GDP growth over 5%, probably 5.5 or 5.6%. It's being dampened, or was dampened a little bit in the last quarter, as we're seeing more of the data come in particular, international trade. We imported a ton of stuff and we didn't export as much. And so our trade deficits have been larger in the latter part of the year. And that will, of course, bring down GDP totals. But all of that said, economy's in very strong shape, and that has been a very, you know, positive piece. And what has done this? Well, Laura showed you this. The transfer payments have been astronomical in terms of their impact on the economy. So you can see in the green box in particular, up in the left-hand quadrant, you can see the transfer payments. And again, these are the tax rebates. Any sort of a transfer, people always ask this question. Most people in the audience know this, maybe a couple don't know this, but the transfers are basically any government payment that goes from the federal or the state government to an individual. Generally, they're federal payments. So this includes, for example, the tax cut checks that were cut, but also includes all of the additional unemployment insurance benefits that went out from the federal government on top of the state government. So you can see in this particular graphic, it may not match up in your mind exactly, but you can see the very first, the fourth bar over was April 15th of 2020. It was the first transfer tax cut check that was sent. That was done very intentionally to be payment out to people on what is typically payment day into the federal government. Then you can see the follow-up bump was the second Trump administration effort that went out in January. And then that huge bump is the Biden's administration March payment. And I'm very unpopular when I say this, but I think that was completely excessive in terms of running up government deficit and all sorts of stuff. I know it was a promise, and I get that, and I appreciate that, but was it needed at the time, and is it sort of leading to some of the issues that we're facing right now in monetary policy? In my mind, the answer is yes, but more later. More importantly, if you look at the tan on the right side before I move on and get going and go a little bit more rapidly, that's employee compensation, that's wages. So you can see that we're at a higher level of wages in the country than we were pre-COVID. You can also see we're at a higher level of dividends, interest, and rents, another category that Laura showed you earlier. So we're basically, in terms of actual activity in the economy, we're seeing higher levels than we had pre-COVID. So the transfer payments are waning in that green piece. We've cut off the federal unemployment insurance. We're not doing any more tax cuts. So we're seeing that sort of phasing out, and that's being replaced in a very healthy way by employee compensation in the upper right-hand bracket there. And this kind of shows you what's happened, and Laura alluded to this. So one of the things, the reason I say this is excessive is that a lot of work has been done on this and shows that people in the low income bracket spent the money, people in the middle income brackets spent some of the money but saved a bunch, and people in the high income bracket basically saved all of it. Now that's a nice thing, but that doesn't do anything for stimulating the economy. It just makes these people feel wealthier. And right now, compared to what it would have been, we have at this point in time, and I have to look down at my notes to make sure I quote these things correctly, we have $2.6 trillion in excess savings that would not have occurred without these stimulus payments. Of that 2.6 trillion, 70% is held by the top 20% of income people in the US. 70% is held by the college educated. 90% is held by homeowners, not people buying homes, but people who already own homes. So when I say it's excessive, it really was a wealth builder for people who are already in your upper income bracket. So I'm not bashing people. You know, honestly, I'm one of those people. I didn't get transfer payments, but I'm one of those people. But and we were freaked out, and we saved, and we did all of that stuff. And if this doesn't change anything either, 60% of it's held by people 55 and older. So it's not helping the younger people. It's not helping the people who are housing affordability really, you know, that excess savings piece. So I'm justifying the fact why I think it should have been phased out at a much lower income level. That's my punchline. Not that it shouldn't have happened, but it shouldn't have happened as high up as it went. Okay, so moving along. We haven't seen the recovery in employment quite as much. This goes through November. We'll have the December numbers tomorrow. You'll see the December numbers, and they're going to be good, I think, based on the private sector. ADP does a release, and they did a release in the middle of this week, and it was over 800,000 new jobs in the private sector. So I'm expecting we're going to see numbers similar to that tomorrow from the US government's, the official data. But you can see we're still down as of November about 4 million workers from where we were. So our wages are higher than they were, our GDP is higher than where it was, but our employment levels are definitely down. And the question is, how do you get these people back into the workforce? And the issue is people aren't participating as much. The jobs are out there. We have a large amount of job vacancies. And the most recent data that have come out from the federal government, over 30 states have more job openings than they have unemployed people, period. Every unemployed person took a job that's listed as unemployed and getting unemployment insurance. Every one of those people could be employed in a job in that state. Of course, they don't have the right skills necessarily for the job, so that's part of the issue. This recovery has been dramatic compared to previous recoveries. You can see how steep it was. We all know this, but you can also see at this point, we're only down 2.6% in terms of employment in a very short period of time. Much different than the 2008 great financial crisis recession, much different than the 2001 tech bubble burst recession. Both of those took extremely long times for recovery. And we're seeing very, strong recovery nationally. Again, still down 4 million or a little bit less than 4 million jobs, but making a faster path back to the top. And in our view, that happens in this coming year. We're going to get back to the same number of jobs by the end of this year in 2022. We're going to get back to this sort of same number of jobs nationally, and also the same number of jobs in the state. So we'll see if that holds true or not. It highlights, however, what Laura was saying about the local area. There just aren't a lot of people, and holding on to people is extremely important, having them not get moved away to other places. So I mentioned the amount of job openings. That same survey also, it's called the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, affectionately referred to by employment geeks as JOLTS. And the JOLTS survey shows that the highest percentage ever of people who left their jobs in November were quitting their jobs, not getting forced out. They were leaving their jobs to take another job. So you get to see, presumably to take another job. So you get to see the fact that there's so much churn in the workforce, so much labor shortage at this point in time. You're getting to see all of that. So moving along, you can go back for a second. Colorado's sort of in the middle of this. When we released this report about 3 weeks ago, these slides have all been updated. So this isn't the same slide set, but when people kept asking when I did the release, hey, how's Colorado going to do? And I said, I don't think we're a top 10 state this year. I think we're like a top 20 state. And you would have thought like the sky fell when I said that. I mean, everybody, headlines on the articles, not a top 20, not a top 10 state, not a top 10 state. But so far, we haven't been in a number of categories. We have not been a top 10 state. We're a top 15 state kind of, but we're not a top 10 state. And we had been a top 10 state for, 8 years in a row or 9 years in a row, top 5 state for a number of those years. So it is a drop in performance, but it's still really, really healthy. And more about that as we go along. We get to the Colorado piece. So going back, just highlighting national unemployment down at 4.2%. I think we're getting to the point where everybody, including the Federal Reserve in their statement a couple of days ago, really highlighting the fact that we're getting very close to full employment in the economy just because we haven't had these people come back in to participate in the workforce. Why are they not participating? Well, a year ago, again, referring back to sort of, what we said a year ago and what we're saying now, a year ago, we didn't have a vaccine at this point, or it was just starting to get, come to fruition. People really didn't want to go back to jobs without being vaccinated. A lot of the essential services jobs people stopped doing, personal services, hair grooming, health services, in terms of social assistance types of health services. All of those things suffered really badly from people returning back to the workforce. Parents needing to take care and well documented, primarily female parents, having to take care of their children because they were not in school, or taking care of the family in a larger sense because they were, home and not away. But all of those things led to people disappearing out of the workforce. That was sort of the predominant story. That story is kind of over. It's still happening, but not at the same level at all. And the story now is really people 55 and older not coming back into the workforce. And we had the same thing happen in 2008. A lot of people lost their jobs and who were 55 and older. And it took 2 or 3 years for those folks to get back into the workforce. But, and I want to highlight this, in 2008, people's housing prices were decimated. They may have even lost their home. Their retirement portfolios were trashed for 2 years. And the mindset was, I actually do need to save more money and so on. And right now, hey, I don't know if you've noticed, but your retirement account went up 25% in the last year. Your house went up 25% in the last year. And so a lot of, quote, my friends are retiring and saying, you know, I don't need this anymore. You know, life's too short. I'm living through a virus and I'm not going back in the workforce. So I am concerned that the labor force situation remains extremely tight. Just to sort of, again, augment what you heard from Laura. All right, so this is the labor force participation rates, and this just highlights what I was saying. You can see how much lower labor force participation is for overall participation rates, male participation rates, and female participation rates. But we just haven't seen that come back. Now, I do want to highlight Colorado is different in that regard, and we have seen a very strong return to the labor force in Colorado, and our participation rates are very close to what they were pre-COVID. We have one of the highest participation rates in the country. I'll talk about that in just a little bit when we get on to the Colorado material. So here's the unemployment rates, and this was the April of 2020 is the red bar, how bad it got for all of these different breakout groups, age groups, and education levels, and Hispanic, Latino, Black, and so on, male and female. The highlight again of the slide here is we're looking at a number right now, the green bar, that compared to where we are in November of 2021, we're looking at a range now that almost all of these categories have gotten back to where they were, or have exceeded where they were in February of 2020. So you can see the tan piece, which is the November numbers, the most recent numbers. The tan piece is further to the right, a little bit higher in terms of the unemployment rate, but not dramatically. They're really, really close to where the green bar is. And at the very top, you can see that the unemployment rate for 16 to 19-year-olds is actually lower than it was going into this. So this has pulled a lot of 16 to 19-year-olds into the workforce in terms of taking jobs. And you probably see that here locally, but there's all sorts of people hiring without skills, bringing people in without skills and saying, we can train them, we can have them do this, we just need people. So they're bringing these people in, and it's, that part is obviously good for the workforce. So moving on to the pieces, household wealth dramatically increasing after the recovery, including real estate and other assets. This is, of course, good for consumption. And when we look at overall consumer confidence, we'll get there in a second, but I accidentally skipped through this slide. How much people are spending to service debt is at extremely low levels. This is, of course, has been driven by very low interest rates. So we have very high wealth. We have high wage numbers, as I showed you earlier on. We have very low debt service burden. So the consumer remains in a tremendous position to continue buying. But what I think is happening, and Laura mentioned what people are buying here locally, in the Front Range, I'd say it's trampolines that are the #1 item that was added to people's homes. And, and as I frequently say, raise your hand. So out here, it probably is not as relevant, but raise your hand if you can look out your window and not see an RV in somebody's driveway. Everybody bought RVs and started going in it now. But right now, the belief is, and especially in that group that I was telling you that has a lot of this money, the wealthier people in the country, and also 55 and older, they want to consume services. They don't consume as much in the way of goods. They're service consumers. So what kind of services they consume? Well, obviously, probably one of the biggest is healthcare, but they love to travel. They love vacations. And so they're waiting for all this stuff to open up so they can, back on their European vacation or go back out to Hawaii or come out to Colorado. So they're waiting on a lot of these things. And that's where I think you're going to see the surge. The next surge is going to be when travel services can really go forward. Consumer confidence has been mixed, to say the least. This is related to two things. One, obviously the virus, and two, the inflation rates in the country have really, consumers are showing a concern about the inflation rates and how much everything costs when they go to the grocery store. More about that in a moment. Corporate profits are unbelievably strong. You can see in the left-hand graphic, and the returns to business have never been greater than they are right now, percentage-wise, in terms of income. So we're seeing really strong corporate profits. We're seeing really strong business investment, again, very key for the long-term growth of the economy. And some of this is going into, quite honestly, hardware and software that helps businesses continue production with not as many workers because they're having such a difficult time, finding workers. One of the pieces that you've heard about and read about a lot is the supply chain bottlenecks. We do think this is going to get better, is getting better right now, and will be appreciably better by the middle of the year. We did a lot of research on this for the Outlook and actually did a special panel session on it at the Outlook. And but this is the inventory to sales ratio. So you can see that there just isn't a lot of inventory out there in retail in particular. And until that gets resolved, until we see some of those inventory numbers go back up, you are going to have this continuing price pressure, if you will, because things are in such short supply, if you will. Businesses are pretty optimistic at the big level. This is the Institute for Supply Management, their Purchasing Managers Index, and 50 is neutral. And you can see dramatically above 50, services even more optimistic than the manufacturing sector, which is on the left-hand side. But you don't quite see the same level of optimism among small business. This is a survey that's done monthly by the National Federation of Independent Business, has literally millions of participants in this survey. And they are continuing to express a lot of concern, and their concerns are around labor shortages. Their concerns are around inflationary pressures, but they're also focused on the virus. A lot of them are in non-essential services like retail and restaurants, and are seeing the impacts of the virus on their traffic. I can't speak to this slide. It makes me sick. Okay. No, seriously, it is going to get better, but you can see how dramatic this has been in terms of the impact on the federal budget. Our debt to GDP ratios are literally closer to third world country right now. Is it problematic today and tomorrow? No, it's not problematic today and tomorrow, but down the line when higher interest rates are in place and it takes more in way of interest rates to interest payments to service the debt, well, we're going to be in a situation where we're going to be sitting there and saying we have to make tough decisions. You're obviously going to pay your treasury securities and your interest on your debt. So what are you not going to supply or what are you not going to provide so that you don't run, deficits of inordinate magnitude? So this continues to be a point, and I think this is part of the sticking point right now on additional investments that could be really good investments in terms of infrastructure. Some of these things are long overdue. We haven't really done a lot with infrastructure. We haven't replaced bridges and roadways and haven't expanded airports and all of those kinds of things that we're talking about here. Telecommunications infrastructure, as Laura was referring to, into rural areas. A chunk of the proposals really focused on that. So is it positive in terms of long-term investment in the economy? Yes, but there's so much other stuff bundled with it. I think it's going to be questionable whether or not it ever finally winds up getting through. I mentioned trade earlier. I'm going to skip through. I want to get moving on to sort of the state piece. We do have very high, have had and through November, significantly high inflation rates. This has impacted the Fed decision-making, as I mentioned earlier. Going to come back to that here very shortly. For the last 8 years, Colorado's price index, consumer price index, has risen more rapidly than the national one. So when we look at the national number, through November, actually, we were pretty much on par with the national one. We'll see when the final numbers come out if we wind up exceeding for the year 2021. But for every year up to that, Colorado's had a higher cost of living increase than the nation as a whole. And some of that driven by shelter, which was highlighted by Laura, making that less affordable is, a big issue for the state. I think long-term, people love coming to this state. They love living here, obviously in your area, but in other parts of the state too. And when you have a lack of an affordable housing stock, even a affordable rental housing stock, it's a big deal. Commodity prices have been strong. This has been leading to this, and I put this slide in just because of what you folks do here. Some people do here in terms of agriculture and energy. So you can see here a little bit of the commodity prices in terms of agriculture. I'll come back and address this just really shortly when I get to the state stuff. And then gasoline, obviously huge jump up in gasoline prices. This is not great news for tourism in general. Usually higher gasoline prices crimp summer tourism. So we are a little concerned about this, and we're hopeful that by the summer, we start to see a little bit of a pullback in terms of fuel prices. It is typically very good for the energy industry. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. So you've been probably following along. The Fed has been changing their narrative every meeting. And 2 meetings ago, they said, okay, we're going to speed up the tapering and we're going to end the tapering. And they weren't specific, but everybody was guessing they were going to end the tapering process sort of by the middle of March. Now, for people less familiar with what the tapering process means, is they're involved, when they taper, they're involved in long-term government debt, long-term government securities. So when they're in the market and they're buying up the US bonds that are out there, they're keeping down the interest rate, the longer-term interest rates in the economy. Everything else being the same, they're buying up a significant amount of this debt, and it enables the federal government, but it enables anybody who's issuing a longer-term debt to do it at a more affordable rate. So we typically convert that mentally into mortgage prices, because that's the sort of signal for mortgage prices is sort of longer-term debt. So we knew they were going to get out of that. Then in their last meeting, or not the minutes they released 2 days ago, but in the actual meeting, they came out and said, we're changing our narrative on raising the short-term rate, and we're going to start raising the short-term rate in 2022. They had been saying we're not raising the short-term rate until 2023. So this has caused all of our forecasts for interest rates to start to really rise fairly dramatically, as you can see from this slide. And so this is where they were in the December meeting, 2021. This is before, and this is comparing it to the September meeting. So this is in the September meeting, you can see the red dots that we're talking about. Almost a bunch of the members were voting that they weren't going to raise at all in 2022, and they were going to start to raise in 2023, and the big movement would be 2024. And now in the tan, what they released in the December meeting is that all of the red dots basically moved up to sort of the 3/4 percentage point range for 2022. So that would signal probably 3 rate increases of 25 basis points each. And then by 2023, getting up into the 1.5% to 2% short-term rates. So the short-term rate right now is still at 0. So they're talking about, over 2 years raising that 1.5 percentage points. And then by 2024, you can see that they're talking about it being, at least a number of them are talking about it being up over 2%. So what's driven that? Well, what's driven that is they were essentially wrong on the narrative around inflation. To be honest, I think they're not going to say that, but they know they've changed their total narrative. It's going to be transitory. It's going to be transitory. Well, now they're seeing a whole bunch of it's moving into wage increases. And once it gets into wage increases, then it starts to put additional pressure on inflation the next year because people have more money to spend and it becomes more circular, if you will. We economists, macroeconomists, we refer to that as wage price spiral. And they're seeing signs of a wage price spiral right now, and it's making them very nervous. So the supply chain stuff will get rectified. We won't have supply side inflation, but now they're realizing they may very well be facing demand side inflation. And so they're going to be aggressive and try to address this through monetary policy. All right, so moving on to Colorado, and I don't know how much I'm over already, but I'll move this along. Colorado, I've been taking, every year when we do this, we use metrics for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years. And of course, this is where we're showing oftentimes Colorado in the top 10 in all of these different categories, and aren't we great? And you can see, actually, the more recent data that's come out in the third quarter of the year, we did move fairly significantly. Our personal income growth, fourth largest in the country, year over year through the third quarter. Per capita, fifth largest. Our overall per capita personal income is the 9th highest state in the country. So those are all, top 10 pieces. Employment growth is 12th. Population growth is 12th. We historically were, 5th highest in population growth. So we really have slowed down there, and more about that in a moment. And then you can see sort of the GDP growth. But you go down to the lower part in terms of hourly wage growth, you go to unemployment rate, where the 33rd, or so below the average in terms of unemployment rate, labor force growth 20. So all of those are things that, you really have a hard time arguing we're in the top 10 when you have some of those kind of starker numbers that are at the bottom. I would highlight the last two. Labor force participation rate, we're the 4th highest participation rate in the country, state participation rate, and home prices, we're the 12th highest state for home price appreciation. For years, we were in the top 5 to 10 in that, so that's actually a little bit lower. You can see over on the right, the 5-year and the 10-year, we're still 6th and over there. But that kind of highlights some of the housing price pressures we've talked about. So you've already seen this, and I'll just say very quickly, to sort of add to what Laura said, dramatic slowdown in the U.S. Population growth in 2020, and that has and will be when they announce officially 2021. We're approaching demographic change in the country that parallels Italy and Japan. We don't have enough babies being born or immigrants coming into the country to replace people who are retiring. We don't have a one-to-one sort of ratio at this point. So there's a lot of concern about how we're going to continue. If you believe we should be growing our GDP and growing our economy, how do you do that when you don't have a large number of, large increases in the workforce? The U.S. Population growth was 0.35% in 2020, well under 1%. So it's a striking feature, and some of it could be, changes in immigration policies. But basically, we're also just seeing nationally and in Colorado, not a whole lot of babies, and more an aging population and not a whole lot of babies. And I think I'm not exactly sure well, I'm going to say something, then I'll be embarrassed when I say this. I'm not exactly sure why this is happening. I mean, we know a lot of young people are putting off forming families until they're in their 30s and so on. And we are starting to see some surge in that group. But I also think, going to Laura's point, I think maybe some people are saying, how many children can I afford in the environment I'm in right now, and maybe they're having one child instead of, they might have been thinking they were going to have two or whatever it might be. But I think that's partially what's causing the problem as well, or not the problem, but the situation. So you already saw population change by county, not going to speak to that. So here's our forecast. We're actually forecasting slower job growth in 2022 than we did in what we think will have occurred in 2021, when all of the official data is in. We expect the growth rate to be over 3%. If the 2022 number is correct, we will get before. Part of the reason our forecast is lower is that we don't see where the workers are going to come from. There's just not available workforce out there. We think there are jobs out there, but we don't see where the workers are going to come from. And you can see around the state unemployment rates, the same areas that Laura was referring to on the Eastern Plains that have population issues, also have unbelievably low unemployment rates, under 2% unemployment rates. They don't have any workforce, but very few places have high unemployment rates in the state, mostly down in the Pueblo, Los Animas kind of area. And then over here, San Miguel has a pretty high unemployment rate. So we look at employment, and again, you're not in an MSA, that's why you're not up here, but you can see the percent change year over year, and you can see which parts of the state. And this particular graphic has every metropolitan statistical area for the entire country, 270 or something, that are on here. And so you can see where we rank compared to every metropolitan statistical area. And what you definitely see is the Springs and Denver have been the shining stars. The Springs economy is very strong. It's actually at higher levels of employment than it was going into. So Springs has been the strongest sort of recovery. And then on the right-hand side, you see, Pueblo and Fort Collins, slower growth rates. Grand Junction had started really strong and has slowed down more recently. And I really want to see the revisions of these data before we start saying things aren't going well, because I just spoke there like 3 weeks ago. Honestly, the place seems like it's booming. The construction industry is just dramatic out there right now. They've got building going on everywhere. And their biggest issue was they couldn't find workers. Again, the same sort of thing we hear from a lot of places. This is a metric that I spend a lot of time focusing on, which is the initial jobless claim. So this came out today. It's not in this graphic, but it would come out nationally today. You'll see it in the news. They'll talk about what the initial jobless claims are for the week. And the big issue here is just to highlight the fact they do the initial and they do the continuing. And the big issue here, when you look at this graphic, is that our initial claims are lower than they were going into COVID. So people filing for unemployment insurance. And on the right-hand side, the initial claim, the continuing claims are about the same that they were pre-COVID. So basically, this is a sign of workforce normality, if you will. And we're seeing the same sorts of things at the national level, that we've seen this sort of recovery to health. What has happened, and again, this refers to your local area as well, what we've seen in terms of income categories and job recoveries, the higher wage industries have not only gotten back to pre-COVID levels, they're higher than pre-COVID levels. That's the top line there. The middle income industries are below, have regained but are below. And the lower income industries, which includes social assistance, piece of healthcare, which includes retail, which includes accommodations, hotels, and so on, that bracket is still well below. So this particular recession, I tell you things you know, really impacted lower wage workers and has made the gap even larger in terms of income distribution types of issues than we had going into this. So some sectoral things and then some summary. So agriculture, again, pretty much every county in the state of Colorado has agricultural income, although the big ones are sort of in the northeast corner, but you obviously have agricultural income from this area, ranching and farming. The big issue for our agriculture group in our booklet that you all have access to a copy that's sitting out there, their big focus was on water, and their concern is not just short run but long run in terms of population growth in the state and also agricultural use of water. And this was as of December 23rd. It has gotten a little better with some of the snows, but the Eastern Plains are still in very, very serious water shortage status. And we saw a lot this past year of senior water rights drawing all the water and junior water rights, people not being able to get the water that at least they had the right to if it was still there. So that's leading to concern over the longer haul on lower agricultural production in the state. All of that said, we're anticipating a really good year in 2022. The prices of livestock are high. The prices of a lot of crops are high. And overall, we're seeing, we believe net farm income is going to be strong in 2022. That's the little block at the top. We do anticipate a little bit of a squeeze related to production expenses. Cattle ranchers and so on are paying more for feed because all of the feed crops are going up in terms of price. But at the end of the day, that's the timer on my speech that they're saying, you're done. You're done, Rich. You're done. Move along. Resources in mining, you do have, of course, that in this area of the state and also in New Mexico right below. And we anticipate a pretty strong bounce back in 2022. We had a nice bounce back in 2021. So far, that has not led to a lot of employment. It is not a large employment sector in the state. It's a large dollar output, and it's also severance taxes, and it's also royalties, probably for some people in this room who have energy on their property. So all of that tends to be good news. What we have seen historically is that higher oil prices have led to more drilling. We do see more wells. We do see more rigs in the state, but it's a really tiny number at this point. So we're cautiously optimistic that certain areas of the state that have suffered a lot with low oil prices, that is primarily northeast Colorado, Weld County, but also we've seen some of that in Mesa County and in the Grand Junction area. We're hoping for some bounce back there. And certainly the higher prices on natural gas have been a big help, and probably for this area as well. So these are the spot prices, and you can sort of see where these are nowhere near what they were, pre 2008, but still very strong in terms of year-over-year kinds of price increases. And we peaked in 2019 with our oil production. We're still the 5th largest oil producing state in the country, and we're anticipating again a bounce back in production in 2022. Similar natural gas, again, 7th largest natural gas producing state. Our residential prices that are charged are below the national average, and we have a much higher percentage of homes heated by natural gas than the country does as a whole. All of that by way of saying that it should in fact help, it keeps that particular piece, keeps energy prices down compared to other parts of the country with similar, temperature ranges and so on. And then coal, it's on a long downward trend and it's not coming back. Okay. The state is trying to do a lot of work up in the northwest corner with coal, and you've got some down here too, but looking for ways to diversify those economies. What we're seeing is, other countries not importing coal very much from the US. They're getting their coal from Australia and so on. So even with the phase out of coal burning plants in the US, which is ongoing throughout the country, there just isn't very much of an international market. So I was being a little trite, and I shouldn't have been, because it's people's jobs, but and incomes, but I don't see any way that's turning around. We've been saying that for several years, and it just seemingly keeps getting worse. Construction, 2000 and this is single and multifamily. To go to Laura's comment, we think for the year we would probably get enough replacement housing in the year for like new growth of the population, but we have a backlog of unfilled, if you will, housing in the state. The state demographer does work on this. Other private sector economics firms do work on this. And basically, we haven't been producing enough housing for the size of our population and the number of households that we have. So we are cautiously optimistic we'll have another good year in permits. Not as strong as it was back in the 90s for those of you who were around, but still pretty good growth. But it gives us our current need, but it doesn't fill backlog of homes we didn't build for a number of years. And that gets reflected in a lot of things, but one of them is the year-over-year FHA home price index. This is through the third quarter. Again, this is only the MSAs, but you can see over on the far left, one of the places with the highest unemployment rates has had a home price appreciation of like 25% year through the third quarter. Pueblo MSA, the Springs MSA, 23%. And it's, I say it's funny. It's funny because you hear it, but it's not like funny to the people who live there. But they're like, you go to Pueblo and they say, oh, it's those people from Colorado Springs. They're moving down and they're buying our houses. You go to Colorado Springs, oh, it's people from Denver. They're moving down. They're buying our houses. You go to Grand Junction. Well, everybody on the Western Slope blames Denver, so it's okay. So, you get over here. Oh, it's the people from the Denver that are, raising our house prices. Boulder, we don't have anybody to blame. I have no idea what the fire is going to do to these data, but the median home price in Boulder is 1.2 million. And we have a lot of houses that are not very big, like tract home, 1,100 square feet houses, and the median home price is 1.2. So we'll see, what's going to happen after this piece. So total value of construction up. This is good news. Doesn't hit 2018, but and generally speaking, we're expecting strong construction. This is a sector that also has trouble finding employees. So moving to an important sector for you, I'll leave this up on the screen for a minute, just so you sort of see what kind of devastation 2020 was for the state tourism. We were down 15% in terms of visitors, even with this strong movement to being outside and outdoor recreation that you've experienced here and we've seen in many parts of the state. We saw a 36% decrease in travel spending in the state. Denver County, of course, more urban, declined 56%. And statewide direct travel employment fell 20%. And then less than 300,000 international visitors travel to Colorado, a 73% decline. So that's, of course, the international travel related to COVID. So we're not forecasting the full recovery here, or the committee, I should say, that did this, is not forecasting a full recovery in tourism to 2023 or 2024. They just see it as a longer haul to build tourism back to the way it was. And again, as I mentioned, every time you get a new variant, then you start to see people, not traveling as much, and that's part of what hits. I'll leave this for a later time, but restaurant industry lost $3 billion in 2020. 95% of the restaurants in our committee surveys have increased wages to attract talents. 8,000 workers below pre-pandemic levels in Colorado. Operational cost increases, 12% increase in wholesale prices to restaurants. And very interesting, the last one, as business people, hopefully you would appreciate this, more than 67% of the restaurants have taken on debt since March of 2020. So, you know, it was big jump in terms of how they're financing and just frankly trying to survive. We had a lot of restaurant closures. I can't say how much, you know, I don't know your local area, but we've seen just a ton of restaurant closures in the Front Range. Public land visits, very strong. This is a good thing. Obviously, you have great public lands nearby, both state and federal, and that's been very strong. And for the benefit of Laura, this is Brian's wife and his 3 children. We always try to build my colleagues' family into the slide presentation. So this is it. And his daughter, who's I think 14 now, is taller than her mom. So that's a sticking point right now. Anyway, and then this, you know, you say, well, you know, you do have a casino here but I didn't put this in so much to highlight casinos. We wanted to talk about it, the fact that it's back to pre-COVID levels, adjusted gross proceeds, but the right-hand side of the graphic, and I don't know if this seems amazing to you or not, it was so stunning to me that I said, we really have to talk about this. In the month of September, over $400 million were wagered in sports betting in Colorado in 1 month. So if this doesn't tell you that there's too much money sitting out there, I don't know what does, right? $400 million on sports betting. And as you probably, I don't know if you know, probably most of you don't know, I don't sports bet, but you have to be in Colorado to bet on these things. You can't, these are not bets coming from like Nevada. These are bets that are Colorado people betting on sports. So it's like, wow, amazing. Snow sports, again, solid, we think, and seems to have weathered the storm. We'll see how it goes, but a lot of adaptation that has led to the ski areas. The big issue, of course, was the drought and lack of snow. And in the last 3 weeks, we've seen really nice snowfalls in most of the ski areas in the state. So that's been a big positive. And the Colorado General Fund, very solid, very strong. And in fact, they're going to be sending us either rebate checks or we're going to be getting money deducted off of our state tax payments because the Tabor limits are definitely kicking in. So we're going to be, the state coffers are going to be full. And, you know, normally I'd say, you know, I wish the state was being able to use that in there's so many shortfalls in the state, but they have so much money from the federal government transfers right now that they're trying to figure out the best ways to spend that money on transportation and infrastructure and small business and so on. I think they have their hands full just figuring out the best use of all of those funds that are out there. And this is our index, which just came out this morning. It was released while I was sitting there, our press release on our confidence index. It rose in the first quarter again. The expectations are up, and the expectations for the second quarter are slightly higher. But this is the overall Colorado index is running at like 57 or 58, 50 being neutral. The firms were very, very positive about everything. But the 2 categories that had readings of over 60 were sales, industry sales, which probably doesn't surprise us. We know business is good, but also hiring. So that we view that as a very positive thing for, you know, employment, and a lot of firms told us that they're planning on hiring, that their hiring is going to continue through the first half of this year at the very least. So hooray for that. So I could talk about these, but I think I'd rather let us just sort of say a few quick comments about them. You can think of things that are really tailwinds as we go forward, that are really helping the economy move along, strong GDP growth, the vaccine. We've seen very good retail sales, energy prices, and so on. We've seen some things that are certainly headwinds for the recovery. The COVID variants, inflation, clearly big part of that. Worker shortages, wage growth issues, the retirees that I mentioned, and certainly for Colorado, we talked about the drought. But we have so many things that are in the right-hand category that we tried to emphasize in the forecast. There's just so many uncertainties. Human behavior. Are people really going to work from home? Are they going to work completely from home? Are we going to need office space? Are we not going to need office space? What is education going to look like when this is all over? Is it going to change? Is it going to be more remote? Or how's that going to affect education systems? We're going to see more migration to rural parts of the state, like here. Are these birth rate changes permanent? We actually had a slowdown in birth rates during COVID. Is that going to continue even slower than it was? Fed policy, we know that's changing, and that could very well wind up. We did this in December, but now we have more information as of 2 days ago. I think that moves over into the headwind category. We're not, Fed policy is definitely going to be something that's going to slow the economy down. I have to be very honest. I think it's going to be tricky if they start raising short-term rates. That there's something called the yield curve, and the yield curve is just a plotting of interest rates by time. So this is what the interest rate is at. I do it reverse because you're looking. So this is what it is at 30. A 30-day security pays 0.25. A 90-day pays this. A 2-year pays this. A 5-year pays this, and so on. So that is typically upward sloping. Well, right now, the bottom end of this is 0, and the upper end is like 1.5. And they're talking about starting to raise the low end up. And there's a lot of people that are concerned that they're actually going to invert the yield curve when they do this. And that would typically, inverted yield curves really slow the economy down or even put the economy in recession. So there's a lot of concern about how they actually execute this policy right now. So with that, and the work from home piece, I will tell you, workforce studies that have been done don't particularly, and education studies, don't particularly show what happened in the last year as being very positive for young people. They don't view the education experience as being as positive for young people. And they certainly don't view the mentorship in the workplace piece of what's happened in the last year as positive. So I'm hopeful, at least, we're going to be back in live mode, at least for nurturing our young as we go forward. Okay, with that, I'm stopping. And Phil Donahue, yeah, so famous Phil, who was married to Marlo Thomas, Danny Thomas's daughter. Yeah. Everybody in the room's like, what is he talking about? Yeah.
Is this working? Okay. I thank everyone at IT, but I want to thank Mike, because Mike is responsible for our sound. So thank you, Mike. I will run around with questions, and then Rich, if you want to have a seat with Laura, there's a microphone there that you can share, and folks feel free to ask questions of one or both. Yes.
So Richard, you mentioned the reasons that a lot of the baby boomers are retiring, and I'm wondering if you're seeing younger people, like mainly more middle-aged people, retiring for the same reasons, that their wealth is increasing. And I read about the FIRE movement. I'm sure you're familiar with it, the financial independence, retire early movement. How is that affecting the workforce for younger people? And then also wealth transfers between the boomers and the following generation, which are now, those people that I'm talking about.
So it's I didn't say this here, but I tell the my students, it's like, you know, I hope you're incredibly successful, but don't you be thinking about retiring before like you're 55 because the country needs you to be in the workforce. And I'm very familiar. Two of my son's more successful friends are in the fire movement, and they think they're going to be out of the workforce at like 43 or 44. That they've done a really good job of saving and so on. So I think that it's great for them. I don't think it then has as much wealth transfer, but the people who are older are going to be transferring wealth back to them, right? Generally. So I do think this kind of workforce is going to have great opportunity for young industrious people. And, I don't see where wages are going to slow down. The wage growth is going to slow down because there's just not enough, workforce out there. So, it's got pluses and minuses, but I sort of said this, and I don't want to keep sounding like, I'm really concerned about the population growth, and I'm really concerned that we're going to be more like Japan or Italy faster than we ever thought we were going to be. And it's being driven again by the low birth rates, but it's also being very much driven by people retiring earlier, and it's also being driven by immigration levels that are really low by international immigration that are really low by historical standards. So, and some of that was policy, but some of that was definitely COVID. I mean, it's COVID related. So, all of those pieces. I'm hopeful we'll be thoughtful about that. I mean, I know people strongly disagree about this stuff, but one of the reasons we've sustained what we've done for so long is we've had incredibly industrious immigrants in the US who came in, and it was the next opportunity. And, there's always mixtures on this, but, missing that piece and missing people wanting to stay in the workforce, I don't know who's going to be the continued serial entrepreneur, or who's going to be the next, great innovator.
So I have a quick question on COLA, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, Rich, but what is Region 9's COLA versus the state COLA? And with that, do you see it dipping negative in years once the supply chain switches back to normal and housing switches back to normal? Or do you continue to see that COLA going through the roof? Cost of living.
The cost of living. So how does Region 9 compare to this? You probably have better sense of that than I do, but the livable wage thing is, I think, the best way you can sort of look at that. I have found the rural areas of the state that I've been, more rural areas of the state that I've been traveling to, have seemingly been sort of less impacted by the supply chain stuff. I think once the supply chain stuff works out, the question is going to be, it really comes down to energy and shelter. Those are, the big ones, and healthcare costs. So when we look at that, look at the components that we're really the most focused on, and so things to produce affordable housing or more. I don't know this area, and I don't want to step on any toes when I say this. We have on the Front Range incredible constraints on developing housing that can come in at any sort of a reasonable price in terms of the impact fees and the structuring and so on. So builders who are trying to focus on affordable housing say, I can't bring anything to the market under $450,000 to $550,000. That's like the minimum. So when you're talking about trying to have the people whose livable wage is, in a lower bracket, or their wages in a lower bracket, you really, you just can't figure out a way to provide housing for those folks. Yeah, so the number for the state, the federal number through November was like 6% year over year, but it's expected to start going down and tail off. The state's number is very close to that. The state number, be really careful here, is the Denver Aurora Metropolitan Statistical Area. It doesn't even include all of the Front Range. It just includes that area. That's how they measure it in a defined area. So it's not going to include, obviously, here, but other parts. The only index that's showing the state compared to the entire state number is the Federal Housing Finance, FHFA, the Cost of Housing Index. And they do a statewide number, and that's running at 12.5% year over year for the state. Yeah.
Yeah, it's working. Okay, so I have some questions around kind of new normal. So one question I have is around supply chain. So obviously we've seen what happens when we have these backlogs of supply chains, and we're seeing solutions developing to kind of fill those gaps. What do you see those solutions going away as the supply chain normalizes, or do you see us trending more towards trying to source at home? That's one question. The other one is, as another part of kind of that new normal is automating and technology replacing jobs. Do you see that trend continuing, and what happens in our economy when the education system is not educating for the right jobs anymore? Like we've got that gap until we change it. Because I see that there's got to be a point where some of those jobs are just going to go away because they're going to find other solutions than humans doing those jobs. So there's got to be kind of a gap in there until we start to educate people for the jobs we need versus the jobs that used to be.
All right, so there's really two questions. So
Yeah.
let me, at least two questions. So the first one, I don't think supply chains go back to the way they were. We've seen, we know a lot of the companies that we work with are sourcing, even if they're out of the country, they're sourcing in Mexico and Central America and South America as opposed to Asia. So that part appears to be changing. Some of them are definitely onshoring here. They're putting supply chain pieces in the Midwest, manufacturing facilities and so on. We've seen a lot of that, especially in the auto industry. We've seen that it's happening pretty rapidly. That I don't think changes. I think people say, we got burned, we're not gonna. So, you know, the whole concept of just in time, which we were so excited about for so many years in terms of inventory, is, I think, gone. I don't, you know, firms after getting burned like they got burned this time, they're not gonna, you know, they are gonna keep inventory, and they're gonna be more prepared, if you will. So I think some of those changes are permanent. But like, for example, so the Outdoor Industry Association is headquartered in Boulder, and there's lots of firms in Colorado, including this area, who do outdoor industry equipment and so on. And those folks, basically, a lot of them, lock, stock, and barrel, are manufacturing in China or Malaysia or you know, Thailand. And you know, I know a lot of those people well. I'm former students and such, and they, I don't think they're changing. They're just trying to figure out that it's really screwed them up. They have to put their orders in a year in advance at this point. So it's really making their planning process more difficult. But I don't think they have a vision that they can afford to produce the things they're producing at a price that's available to the average consumer if they bring that on, you know, start manufacturing that here. So I think some of those industries, especially apparel, I don't see that changing a lot. I think other things that we've learned is, you know, I don't know, Boeing, you know, they're outsourcing to the entire world, and they're like 30 something countries, different countries, with making one part for a jet. I mean, you know, what are you doing? You know, so I think they figured that kind of piece out, that some of that has to change. Educating for the jobs, I think the state is making a really strong effort on that right now. I think you're absolutely correct. when I said there's more than one job opening or a job opening for every unemployed person, you know, yeah, but not everybody can do arc welding and not everybody can do drywall and not, you know, I mean, there's lots of skills. The construction industry in particular is very short of employees, and we're seeing a lot of people retiring at pretty early ages. Their bodies are wearing out at 55 and 50, you know, and with no disrespect, that's hard labor. A lot of that, carrying that stuff around, roofers and on and on. So I do think we have to educate, but I also think what you said, I think every business is trying to figure out how they can automate pieces. And the businesses that can't easily automate are the ones, I don't know, maybe restaurants. You can automate some things, but you can't automate everything. I think those are the businesses that are going to, you know, really kind of struggle the most in terms of keeping costs under control. You know, you have to keep paying higher and higher wages. How do you do that? College towns are fortunate because we have, you know, students, you know, working on restaurants and stuff when they're in school. So that's really helpful, but they don't, hopefully they graduate, and when they graduate, they don't necessarily stay in the town, and they don't necessarily stay in food service or whatever. So, you know, that's an issue or a problem. So I don't know that everybody can automate, and so what we have seen, I don't know, I think you have seen this locally based on my one experience yesterday, but what we have seen is restaurants are only opening like for breakfast and lunch, and they're not opening for dinner, or they're opening for dinner and they're not opening for lunch. We just see much shorter hours because they can't get workforce.
Add to that is, I feel like businesses need to expect the people they hire that they will have to train. That's just what is going to happen. And, you know, right now, folks, you want that person that can walk in the door and do the job, and we're not going to get that. Moving forward.
We have 2 questions, 3 questions over here, and about 10 minutes.
Okay, my question is about the economy in general, just as someone who's kind of at the beginning of my career and going to be in the workforce for 30 years. What is the repercussions of, I feel like we're seeing consolidation of corporations and industries and ownership rapidly happening, and fewer people are in control of more of the economy. And so it just seems contradictory to the ideals of capitalism. So what are the effects going to be of that?
So I think you're right. We've seen, you know, definitely seen consolidation, and we've seen it for a variety of good reasons. But we've also continued to see actually a resurgence in entrepreneurship and small business growth in the last 2 years. Some of it, you know, I jokingly say, well, you know, I got my refund check and it helped me fund, you know, starting a new business or whatever. So I'm hopeful. We believe that industries need to have enough competition around them, even if they're big companies. If there's enough small businesses biting at their heels, that you know, that will keep the industry more competitive. And we've certainly seen a tremendous amount of this in tech and in life sciences. Tons of startups, and now tons of successful startups. A lot of venture capital flowing in that direction. So I think some of the industries that are consolidating are old dogs that are, you know, trying to hold on. I'll have to be really careful, other than some of the tech, you know, like the Googles of the world that are drawing, or Facebook's, that drawing a lot of attention. But other than those, it's been really a lot of sort of bigger companies that are trying to get some sort of growth out of, you know, acquiring as opposed to internally generating. My general view on that, which didn't come through, is I don't think that's great for the economy, because I think organic growth, to me, is much more important for the health of a capitalist and just an innovative economy in capitalism than, I'm going to improve my bottom line by buying another company that does the exact same thing we do.
And Rachel, I can add to data-wise for our region, 91% of our businesses have less than 9 employees. So we do have small businesses, and I think that actually is one of our benefits, because we do have like the SCAPE program, and we're able to help businesses become, something big and better, with accelerators and stuff. And I think in rural areas, it's actually, this is my opinion, easier to start a business, because, you can start small, and businesses kind of have to start small, and then grow. And if you're in the Front Range and you start small, you may be invisible. You may not be able to attract what you could in a rural area. And so I actually think that's one of our strengths in terms of entrepreneurship. And
Hi, I had a quick question for Laura and maybe Richard about aging. You mentioned how we're not having enough babies to replace our aging population. And I think the median age in La Plata County is currently much younger than it is, say, in Montezuma County. And yes, we need to do what we can to retain our young people. But I'm wondering if you see an opportunity there, that like an economic opportunity to help serve our aging populations.
definitely, I think that what we're seeing right now is that we have young retirees here, but they're still retirees, so they're not in the workforce, but they do age out to where they don't stay here because we don't have enough like long-term care, assisted living, ways that they can actually stay in the community. And that would be the opportunity, because we know we all are going to have birthdays. We know we're all going to get older, and those healthcare types of living situations we need to accommodate, or we will start losing our oldest members because they have to be with family. And if their family's not here and there's not a way to support them. So that's my quick piece. With youth, I think La Plata County has the younger median age mainly because of the college and, the ability to attract young people. And then we have to figure out our opportunity is how do we keep them and how do we have jobs and housing for them?
You're certainly not unique in having that problem. Grand Junction's done a great job of developing assisted living and trying to hold on to their people aging in place, their retirees that have, now it's quite honestly, a much more, at least it was a much more affordable place than Durango. But they thought about that very carefully, and they have really good healthcare. You have good healthcare here as well. They really concentrated on that, and we're seeing that as a potential issue. And there are other places that have done a nice job with that as well in the state, but I'd say the predominance is people are worried. Front Range is worried about that. If we don't have enough, assisted living housing, everybody starts going back to their, where they grew up, didn't grow up in Colorado, and they go back to be, or they go to some other place in the country where their kids are living. And so there's a real concern about that, I think, in general. I would guess for places that are really popular with retirees like here, it's probably more acute.
We have time for our last question.
Richard, early on in your presentation, you indicated pretty clearly you were not completely supportive of the amount of stimulus by the Biden administration early on in this administration. It was a political promise, forget about that. But are you referring to the absolute level of the stimulus, or are you referring to the distribution of that cash, or both?
Both. So it definitely should have been phased out at much low. I mean, we were giving people up to $200,000 rebate checks who never lost their jobs. The third check, not, I mean, to me, this was just insanity. And the fact that, now we have a debt that, third world kind of level of debt in this country is just, to me, it's appalling. And you could have used that money to do the infrastructure stuff and not give it to people who didn't really need it. So I, in my opinion, didn't really need it. And I think that $2.6 trillion of excess savings amongst that group, that's excess. Had we not had the stimulus checks, that's what's driven. So they're sitting on $2.6 million that came via the government. So do we really need to do that? My opinion, no. And this is not a political statement at all about this president versus the last president, but I think you could still in November of 2020 say, we need more stimulus because we're not coming out of this. I didn't agree that one should have gone all the way up to 200,000 either, but that's okay. But you could see that we really needed it. By March, we didn't need it. And now we've built a lot of inflationary pressure into the system on the demand side, not just the supply side, but supply chains, but on the demand side. So now we have to figure out how to correct the inflation problem. So yes, both of those. And I just wish it was spent on different things like, it should have been real stimulus, should have got real people, real jobs, working in construction, doing infrastructure, doing all of this stuff.
Thank you, everybody, for your, every year, I think our questions get better, which is awesome. I love that. Thank you all. Again, Happy New Year. Thank you for coming today. Thank you, Rich and Laura, for doing an amazing job. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Mike, for making, and everyone else who helped make everything run smoothly. I think in years past, Rich and I don't know, Laura's schedule have been very generous with their time. And if you did want to say hey on your way out, I think that would be outstanding. And maybe you had a question you didn't get to ask and want to run by them. There's also, I think, a lot of food in the back if anybody wanted to take any food with them. Again, sorry, Wells Fargo didn't have a representative. Hopefully next year we'll be in a better position for them to travel. Until then, I'm sure I'll see all of you out and about, and stay safe. Thank you.
I am going to